Welcome to the Business Trendsetter podcast, where we teach you all about trends and how to use them to grow your business. My name is Manny Turan.
And I'm Adam Hartung.
And today we have a special podcast where we're talking about the release of our new power course, our mini course called Unlock Growth. And I want to spend some time here to talk specifically about a major problem that occurs all across the business world as it pertains to things we do to prevent growth. And it's things that we don't always know we're doing. And it's remarkable once you start to dig into this concept of lock-in, how pervasive it really is in the business world. It's everywhere. And you look at companies like Facebook and Netflix and the ones that are high flyers, and you realize that what locks them in is very, very thin compared to what locks other organizations like the GEs and Sears. And I'm going to pick on another organization today because of this remarkable insight I just gained from Adam regarding the U.S. Post Office. So there was a time when most of the communication in the world was done via letter, and obviously it advanced, and we brought into that the telegram and the telephone, and then the fax, and then ultimately the internet has been huge for the past 30 years, 25 years or so. And Adam, tell us a story about our good old friend, the post office, and how they had some amazing ideas 20 years ago that were ultimately killed by Congress. And it would have been a much different world if those things would have actually become reality.
Yeah. I mean, if I could wave a wand and have one institution recognize how many ways it's locked itself in and therefore become unable to get anything done, it would be the United States Congress. Back around the turn of the century, in the 1998-99 timeframe, I was a senior partner at Computer Sciences Corporation. We were a very, very large contractor for the U.S. government, a lot of defense projects, a lot of civil projects. And as head of strategy, I was asked to participate in a project to look into the future for the United States Postal Service. And it was something we did not as consultants for the Postal Service, but rather as facilitators working with the Postal Service. And what we basically did was pointed out that email was replacing snail mail. And that as that was happening, what would that future look like, and what would it mean for the future of the post office? Should we shut down the post office, for example? And so they ran through a lot of exercises, and they were able to recognize that, in fact, the amount of first-class mail was going to decline, that there would probably be a decline also in advertising mail that was sent out because people would just communicate more across the web. They also recognized that the package shipment business was going to get larger because as electronic commerce grew, there'd be more packages shipped, so that was the other side of the opportunity. But beyond that, they saw that there was really a class structure and an economic structure in which people that could afford a computer could be doing email. And especially if you think about the turn of the century, people that had offices, they were doing email. People that had means had email in their homes. I've got mail, AOL, all that kind of stuff. And but there was also this recognition that a lot of people didn't have those computers, some of them because of age, some of them because of lack of money. And so they said, well, what couldn't the post office take on this role? And you could get an email address with the post office, and it could be secure because they're a federal agency. They could actually set up an archive for you. You could hold all your permanent records in there, like, say, your medical records. You could have scanned images of, say, your last will and testament or any other legal documents. You could then have access to it for yourself, or you could provide it to your family members. You could then find your way into electronic banking, which was not possible at that time for people that didn't have expensive cell phones and didn't have computers. So they could set the post office to be the intermediary in electronic banking. So they had all these ideas. They put them into a plan. And all these things that I've talked about are things that you can get today, right? They're readily available but on the private market. But they didn't happen nearly as quickly as the post office was ready to make them happen. And what occurred was the post office went to, their money's all approved by Congress. And so every year they have to take their plans forward to Congress. And the people responsible at Congress literally said, we're not going to fund that. That's not the role of the post office. And it was pretty much a real identifier of point in time where you could see that the post office saw that it had a future that could be very relevant, it could be very sustaining and successful. But what happened was the people responsible for the post office didn't want that to occur. They didn't like the post office because it was a public trust, and they preferred for things to go towards private enterprise. And so they actually started, not only did they not approve those measures that were asked for in the strategic plan, but they started coming up with a lot of onerous requirements for the post office, like how it had to fund its pension and how it had to fund its own business model. And so 20 years later, what we have is an organization that's still pretty much under attack. And because what happened was it's been locked in to the requirements that were set for it back in the 1950s. And nobody has allowed them to change those requirements despite time passing. And so I think it's an example where we can look and see that you can have a good vision for the future, but you won't accomplish that vision if you can't get out of your past. You got to find some way to identify the shortcomings of how you do business today and then attack those things. And that's where lock-in is. In the case of government entities, and I've worked with a few, usually we say, well, there's a better future involved here, but you have to get a regulation changed, or you may have to get a law changed. Everything about the future of any government entity, whether it be city, county, state, or federal, is usually written down on a piece of paper, and it's very clearly defined boundaries of what that organization is allowed to do. Then you have to rewrite the boundaries if you want to change. And it's an example of really formal lock-in. And we would say that companies don't have that kind of thing, but in fact they do. It's often just not written down, right? It's those boundaries are not clearly stated. They'll be, embedded inside the organization somehow, in terms of what they do. I talk a lot about encyclopedias, which are, a lost item. The last encyclopedia I had, went from being in the house where my children used it to going down into the basement where nobody used it. Yep. When I moved and I took it to Goodwill, the Goodwill literally refused to take it. And they said I should take it back home and put it into the recycling bin. They couldn't even give it away. And what happened to the encyclopedia was simply that they locked into the one method of delivering information. That was print. And without talking about the fact that they were so dedicated to it, they were locked in. They let the organization structurally designed to be good at printing keep them from seeing alternatives such as digital distribution. It could have been done initially on CD-ROMs, for example. And they missed that, and then they, of course, they didn't ever put it out on the internet, so the encyclopedia companies went away. This is an example of not being able to necessarily recognize that your lock-ins are these huge limitations until it's far too late. Far too late to do anything about it. And so that's why I think it's important people understand this course, because there's kind of two parts to growth. One part is seeing the future, seeing what can be done, and that's where trends come in. And then you start to build out the plan. But the other part of looking at trends is recognize what they're going to do to your business as it exists today. How will it be impacted? Encyclopedia companies had every opportunity to see the advent of CD-ROM and CD-ROM-based information, and then to see the internet coming along. But what they didn't do was say, what's this going to do to our business? Will it have a point at which it would have a dramatic impact, like the post office was able to see in the year 2000, and then be able to set a new course, and then recognize what's in the way, and how do you actually get rid of those barriers?
Yeah, this is a really good segue to discuss that even deeper, because in the world of business, you can be extremely lucky and kind of fall into a trend and fall into all these sort of things, or you can actually be intentful and carve out a strategy that will get you there. And the internet's full, social media's full of all these people that are claiming to take your business to the next level, but none of them really have that sound foundation that was built on your research, Adam, over the past 25 years. And ultimately, as you start to listen to our podcast, as you are part of our community and understand how we operate, you see that there is a very, very solid methodology here, which you can use and apply on a practical level to grow the business. So the course we have here that we'll be releasing is really, it's over 2 hours of content. It's super, super specific and efficient on how it works. You're not talking about a tremendous amount of time, but that 2 hours will get you to think to get out of the box, then think, because it is going to open up your world as it pertains to this concept of lock-in. And, we've discussed this in many forums in the past. We've discussed just recently about GE and about Sears and other companies that have sort of fallen by the wayside by really ultimately ignoring the writing on the wall, which is in this case these trends, and falling victim to them. And ultimately, last couple weeks ago, Sears closed their last store in Illinois. I mean, that's a huge. That was their legs, right? That was it, and they're going to fall, and it's just a matter of time.
So what we often don't think about is the fact that if your revenues stall, you're in so much trouble. And what we're trying to do with recognizing lock-in is keep you from falling into a revenue stall. When you start trying to cut costs, inevitably it leads to bad stuff. Nobody ever saved their way to prosperity. It's never happened. There are no examples of companies that saved their way to prosperity. The reality is costs always go up. I mean, you can get rid of a new product line, or you can get rid of a division, or you can lay off a bunch of people. But your cost of people go up. We're looking at it right now. Here we are post-pandemic, and labor costs are going up. Your healthcare costs go up. Costs of energy goes up. Costs of equipment goes up. Costs are always going up. So when you find yourself stalled and you're having to try to cut costs, what happens is that just throws you into a tailspin of failure. Because now what's occurring is you're pretending like you're actually lowering your cost structure when in fact you're not. You're just throwing bodies off the boat to try to keep it from sinking as long as you possibly can. You're not doing anything to generate revenue. You're not bringing in new customers or new products. And so you're actually chasing yourself into death. And so what we have to recognize is before we get there, we have to attack this problem. Once we're there, it's too late. Once we're in that situation, we're already at GE, we're already in IBM, we're already one of these companies that's in horrible trouble. And so what we can do is start to look around our organization. For example, start to find out who are the Dr. No's in your organization. That's one of my more popular approaches. There's always people in an organization that you'll hear, your project can't be approved or won't go forward unless Jim Smith says, hey, yes, that's okay. And the reason is that this person's been in the company a while, and they were at some point given the power, and they made a couple of decisions in which they stopped something from happening. And when they stopped it, people thought that was a good decision. And so then they get awarded this position of being Dr. No. And their clout in the organization depends on saying no. If they can't say no, then they're not needed. So their job in their minds is to say no. And always tell people that person doesn't belong. we give them that right. The organization gives them that right. And we shouldn't, because the Dr. No's simply are saying no because that's their job, is to say no. And if we keep saying no, we never do anything new. So I'm always working in organizations saying, well, who's the Dr. No in this division? Often there'll be somebody, say, in finance that just never approves the numbers. They don't think the numbers are accurate. Or it could be somebody in marketing that says that this new product doesn't align with the brand strategy. Could be somebody in production who says that we don't have the skills in the organization to implement this technology, for example. Could be somebody in IT who says we can't go forward because we're limited by the capacity of our systems. These Dr. No positions are deathly. They're really deathly. And one thing this course does is help you work through identifying who these people are in the organization and addressing that, being honest about it and addressing it, and getting those barriers out of the way. It's kind of like, even as something as simple as your SAP system or your ERP system, SAP being one brand of an ERP system, what does it do? It codifies operating practices. Well, that's okay if you're looking for efficiency, but then when you need to change your operating practices because you need a new delivery model of some kind, the ERP system often gets in the way because it doesn't have the adaptability to do something new. So then we have to start to attack that. We have to say, well, is the value of the ERP system so high that it will keep us from finding and approaching new opportunities? And often you'll have the IT department say yes, or you might have operations say yes, or you might have finance say yes. the costs of change just exceed the benefits of the efficiency we have of these technology systems, CRM systems being another one.
Yeah,
But
and I think it's important.
That's a big roadblock we have to attack.
Yeah, for sure, and it's important to illustrate to our fan base here that it's really companies like Apple and Netflix. They have ERPs, they have MRPs, they have CRM tools. They have a lot of these tools that we're talking about, and we're not necessarily vilifying these tools as they stand, but we are talking about the senior leadership and the direction that they are heading towards, and being a nimble organization that's not going to be consumed by these tools. You use a really good example, Adam, when we were recording the course about when you have an organization and you have a successful organization, you begin to pour in the concrete of the ERP system to lock everything in. And most people see that as a good thing, and to some degree, it does have some merit. But when you start to, when you can no longer shake yourself from that, then it becomes problematic. So let's take that discussion, Adam. Let's go a little bit deeper.
Let's take a look right now at General Motors. Okay, this is a nice example. If you go back to the 1980s, Roger Smith recognized the difficulties in the auto industry as it was, and he utilized acquisitions to change the future. He bought Hughes Electronics, for example. He bought EDS. So it put GM in the computer business. It put him into the aviation business. And then he said, hey, we should have a new way of competing. And he told a bunch of people, go off and create Saturn. Completely standalone, completely away from General Motors, start creating a brand new car company. And those projects were wildly successful. But then time goes by, Roger Smith retires. Somebody comes in behind him, and they said, wait a minute, shouldn't we focus on the business we really know? And they sell off the aviation business, which is much more successful in the car business. They get rid of the computer company to the extent they had one, and mostly just absorbed it and ate it up and chewed it up. And then they went in and said, Saturn, you don't get to operate independently anymore. You have to start using the same drivetrain, same engines, same componentry, because we need you to get these efficiencies and scale benefits. What Saturn wasn't even asking for them, right? So the locked-in mentality of General Motors couldn't stand the change, wouldn't allow the change, and turn the company around and brought it back to where it had been. And now GM's facing this door once again because we're going to electrify, right? Yeah. And we see the CEO of the company at the top saying, hey, we're going to be all electric cars by the year 2030. And I think she really means it. I think she really believes it. But the problem is she's trying to take an organization that's very, very locked into doing business a certain way and say, I want you to operate very differently. She needs white space teams, right? She needs to be able to say, somebody go off and work on this electric car project, and let's start to dismember and disentangle General Motors as it has been historically so that we can create a new General Motors. We're going to have to attack our old way of thinking, our old way of doing business. She probably should rethink the dealership structure as it exists today. Because, again, dealers made a lot of sense whenever you bought a car and then you had to do a lot of service on that vehicle, which was true with any internal combustion engine car with a transmission. But now electric vehicles need far less service, far less maintenance. So the dealer structure as it exists today doesn't really make any sense in an electric vehicle market. So these are the things that she needs to attack as head of the company. You recognize that these are old lock-ins related to old business models, and you can identify them and attack them, and then start to go off on the course to the future that you've laid out for yourself.
Yes, and lock-in isn't just a problem with these giant companies. It happens all the time in the small, $500,000, $1 million, $5 million business. It's everywhere. And these are the things that are going to prevent you from growth. This is why we named the course Unlock Growth, because lock-in is what is going to hold you back. It's going to hold you back from making decisions you would normally make if you weren't locked into this modality, whether it's a structural lock-in, behavioral lock-in, a cost lock-in. These things are holding you back. So I really invite all of our listeners to really take a long look at your own organization and see what's prevented you from growth. And our course will offer you some very specific ways to get out of that mentality, out of that way of thinking. And it isn't always going to be easy. If you're locked into something, it isn't like you can just easily take a sidestep and be away from it. It's going to take some time. So, Adam, can you think of any companies that were facing near death that made a decision that sort of recognized lock-in, kind of worked around it, and ultimately became successful because of it?
Well, the penultimate example is Singer. Singer was clearly identified as a sewing machine company, and their business came under attack by a division of a very large Japanese company that was named Brother. And the Brother sewing machines were far less costly and had far more features to them. And eventually the executives were looking around and they said, we're really not competitive. We have a brand name and we have the machine is heavier, but it's not inherently that much better. And it certainly we're never going to catch up when the features were so far behind. And we're so locked into thinking of Singer as a sewing machine company. And what they did was they literally sold the entire business to the Brother company. They sold out to their competitor and took the money, and then they sat down and said, what's the future supposed to be? Once they were disentangled from the sewing machine business that had controlled their lives, the leadership of Singer were able to identify a new course, which was to get into defense electronics. And it became a wildly successful business that they sold eventually to General Dynamics, far more successful than the sewing machine business had been for 20 years. So it's just one example of a really drastic set of actions that are being taken so that you can find a way to get into something new and something, get outside the box and think, is to get away from your lock-ins and to overcome your lock-ins. And one of the things I often see when I'm working with small businesses is the founder CEO started the company. There weren't many people. Everybody got their hands dirty working. And the CEO founder can't quit getting her hands dirty working. She's in there, trying to solve the day-to-day problems. Yeah. Long after the business should have that, the CEO shouldn't be doing that. Somebody else should be running the business day-to-day and solving the problems. CEO needs to be focused on the future, need to be thinking about what it is they have to do, and need to be figuring out how they can get the organization to a new place, how they can attack their behavioral cultural lock-ins, how they can get rid of their structural lock-ins, how they can overcome the very large investments they've made that are now cost lock-ins, and then go towards the future. And so that's why this course is actually in many ways better for the small business even than the large business, because in the smaller business, it's usually one person that has to go through this sort of exercise to recognize how they've locked things in. How they've made everything happen one way, how it's all run on a single set of assumptions. And then now once they can get their minds around that, they can attack those and start to find some white space and start to get some new things going.
Yes, very true. I have a couple of friends that are founder, business owners, CEOs of companies that are $3-4 million a year companies. I mean, not bad, not giant, but a little lifestyle business. And it amazes me that a handful of those folks still work like on a weekend basis or even during the week on the business or in the business. I mean, they're literally running machines, and they're running electronic machines. They're running, mills and lathes. And I'm asking, well, why are you doing that? And their answer is that they enjoy it. But when I ask them a little bit deeper question, they actually inform me that they feel like they have to, because otherwise they won't move the business forward. And I talk with them and I said, listen, you've got to look beyond that. You got to see what's going to be the next lily pad you're going to jump onto, because the one you're on now isn't going to last forever. And one of these particular companies he's terribly locked into his building. He's got this space that he can't really walk away from.
I have a car, a BMW, that needs some service. And so I was looking around to try to find a mechanic that could take care of it. And we were reading reviews, that kind of thing. And I found this business that I liked the reviews. I liked what people said about it. And it was a woman-owned repair shop. And so I went in there and to get the car taken care of. And I was talking to the proprietor, and she's working the front desk. And I said, not very often I find a woman-owned repair shop. And she goes, yeah. She said, that's why we're so successful. And I kind of chuckled a little bit. And I said, would you like to elaborate on that for me? And she said, yeah, I don't go back there and get my hands greasy. I focus on customers. I think about their needs. I think about what we have to do to take care of the customer. And I have other people that tell me what's wrong with the cars, that tell me how to fix the cars, and then we figure out how we can provide good service at a good price. And I thought, that's the perfect small business person. She's sitting there. What does she say? I'm thinking about the customer. So she's thinking about, do people need rides to her shop? Do people need a Wi-Fi to use if they're waiting on their vehicle? What cars should she be addressing? All cars, foreign cars, domestic cars. She's really, interviewing all of the customers. And in fact, whenever they finished repairing my vehicle, they actually they didn't send me a survey. She walked me through a set of questions as I'm paying for the service. Did I like how the process started? How did she find me? How could she communicate with me? Could she send me text if they have specials? Which I like emails. So then I went back. I had to have some more work done on the car about 9 months later, and I called her up, and she goes, "Oh, I see you're a second-time customer." Because it still makes me go through the questions, even the second time. And I said, well, you asked me this 9 months ago. And she said, yeah, but that didn't mean your answer didn't change. See,
That's
just
remarkable.
Constantly thinking about the customer instead of, as you said, do they come in to deal with at the repair shop wiping the grease off their hands? Like somehow that makes them that much more valuable whenever it comes to actually figuring out how to make me happy as a customer. I long ago gave up any hope of knowing what was wrong with a car. I mean, they're so much more sophisticated than I have an ability to diagnose or understand. I really need somebody I can trust. And I have to say, this woman made me trust her. Just her approach to business made me trust her very much. More than I would probably trust the person with greasy hands who I'm not sure is spending enough time thinking about my needs and more time thinking about his own training and trying to keep up with whether or not he's a good enough mechanic.
Yeah, and that those problems that you just discussed there, Adam, are everywhere. And the solution of that customer service, we see it and we're delighted by it, right? This is a memorable experience, and I would assume that you're going to go back to that shop over and over again, right?
Yeah, they did. Did a good job, good service, stood behind their work, and I thought the price was fair.
So I'll take this last minute or two here to discuss a little bit about our big course. So we have another course called Think Innovation, which is sort of the foundational premier course that Spark Partners offers that goes, and we do talk about lock-in a little bit in that course, but we talk about a lot of other things on how actually to set your sights on emerging trends and in both where to take your business to and how to deal with the business at hand with these trends. And so both of these are, both our courses are phenomenal ways for you to be intentful on how you're going to grow your business, lay a foundation, bring your team together and actually expose them to some of these teachings. We also offer a cohort model, which will allow you and your staff together to come together and take the course. And Adam or I will actually be part of that in the beginning, at the end, to really illustrate and help you to bring the teaching into the boardroom, into your staff room, so that it's not just something that you put on the shelf. It's something that you get your hands dirty with on a constant basis. And these aren't crazy ideas. They're very sound ideas, many of which are, as I like to call, unconventional wisdom. It's the things that we hear in the business lore that are oftentimes not true. I've mentioned this many times in this podcast about my trusted advisors telling me to focus on my core. So here I am, the General Motors of my region and my thing, and they're telling me, don't worry about those other things happening in your industry. Just worry about building cars, because that's what people want, and that's what you have to be doing. And I thought to myself, really? I don't know. No, you got to focus on your core. And that's what ended up putting me out of business. And that's why when I first met you, Adam, I was so sort of blown away, because everything crystallized. It all came together as to why my own business failed, and I made a sort of a point to myself to not let anybody else that I knew fail because of these things that for me were mysterious.
Yeah, and everybody starts this journey in a different place. Some start it by saying, I want to do my scenarios and I want to figure out my growth plan. And some people say, I really need to understand why I'm struggling with the whole idea of innovation or struggling with growth. And so depending on where you want to start, the courseware makes a difference. Both of them, they're hand-in-glove type classes. They're not exactly the same. They don't duplicate each other. One's not embedded in the other. They are different. But I think I'd kind of like to end up with a little story about a real client. It was a college that was losing admissions. The admission rate was going down. Not uncommon. Smaller universities having difficulty competing. And when I met with them, it didn't take long for them to identify, the future was in online education. They knew that students were talking to each other a lot, and that so their old method of acquiring students, which was to go to high schools and go to fairs and college fairs, and then try to encourage somebody to come to campus, bring their parents, walk them around the campus. That process was not working as well. And what was working was much more communication between students, freshmen talking to high school seniors, seniors in college talking to high school seniors. What was my experience like? Very developed Facebook environments, Instagram environments, that kind of thing. And I said, well, okay, we know what we have to do. Why don't we do it? And they said, well, we don't have any money. And I said, well, that's because you're spending all your money doing the stuff you've always done. And they said, yeah, well, but we have to do what we've always done. And I would forget looking out the window, and I said, and the reality is you're not going to do anything different until you start selling these buildings. And that was the equivalent of the old story about the Spaniards that arrived at the Gulf of Mexico, and to keep the sailors from going back home, they burned the boats, right? They said, well, now we have to go find the gold. And until we were able to attack the lock-in of the building, that was sitting there, and we said, get rid of those buildings. Now we know we're going to do online classes. Now we know we're going to start to do things differently. But we've got the buildings every day, trying to fill those classrooms every day. That kept them doing things the same way every day. And it just took a shock, which was to identify one of the big lock-ins, which was in their case a cost lock-in, being those buildings, recognizing that we either sold it or we just put those buildings up for rent. That would generate revenue, would generate cash, and give them the money that they could start to do the things they really needed to do. So it depends on where you need to start. Some people have to get broken out of their lock-in before they can actually start to be effective and build a long-range plan. But the reality is that you'll probably have to deal with lock-in at some point in your organization, and now we have a tool for that.
Awesome. Very, very good. Thank you very much, Adam. As always, appreciate your insights, and have a wonderful week, and we'll be talking to you next week.
Thank you.
Cheers.